This is Questions of Courage, a podcast from the youth section at the Goetheanum, hosted by Nathaniel Williams.
Welcome to Questions of Courage. Today I would like to share some ideas and really inspiring imaginations that recently were discussed in a gathering that was part of the pre-program for the event the youth section is hosting at the Goetheanum in collaboration with the World Goetheanum Association. And if you listen to the last episode, I went into detail about this. And today I would like to focus on one of the questions that we're working on to prepare this in relationship to the significance of land for a humane economy, the significance of land ownership in the economy. And in the working group that is preparing the event, we invited Susan Witt, who is the director of the Schumacher Center for a New Economics, and she was joined by her colleague David Fix to try to really understand these ideas very clearly. The session was called the decommodification of land. Decommodification is a mouthful, and you may already be kind of discouraged on hearing it, but actually it's something that is very intuitive to understand, but it might take a minute. Many of you will already be familiar with it, even if you don't know it. But let me say a couple things about Susan Witt. I first met her at this point years ago. And it was in the building where the Schumacher Center for a New Economics is housed in Massachusetts, outside of Great Barrington. And actually, I was participating in an intensive study of Rudolf Steiner's economics course, a really inspiring course on economics that I mentioned many times in other episodes as well. And during that meeting, I quickly became aware that Susan Witt has drawn deep inspiration and also developed very sophisticated ideas and nuances through her study of Rudolf Steiner's economics course, but also through her profound life experience. She and her husband, Robert Swan, developed the Schumacher Center for a New Economics together. And in the working group meeting that we had on decommodifying land, she went into some detail of the history of their work and how it was connected with the civil rights movement and trying to get access to land in some cases for people who were struggling in highly segregated and what we call anti-social situations in the southern states of the United States of America. She spoke about influences that came from the East, from the study of Gandhi's philosophy, and also from the famous economist Schumacher, who is most well known for his book, Small is Beautiful. And so just a little background on her, and I encourage you to look at the show notes and also to visit the website where you can find writings from Susan and a whole host of other things that are really inspiring and interesting. And one area of particular focus for the center and Susan has to do with decommodifying land. Okay, so decommodifying, let's go right at that word and how it's understood in this conversation and context. A commodity is something which you could say, one way to talk about a commodity is something that can meet the immediate need and kind of fulfill that need, a material need or even a service of a person by another person. So for instance, corn is a commodity, and corn has the opportunity or the capacity to fill fulfill my hunger and give me strength and meet that need. And we have commodities exchanges. All of the markets that we visit are full of commodities. But it's not only short-lived commodities such as food that we're talking about in the markets. We also have furniture and lasting commodities such as personal houses that we might own. But we also have the convention, at least in many parts of the world and in the United States where I'm from and where Susan is active, of land ownership, that we can own land. And we treat land like a commodity, like something that can be bought and sold on the market. And one of Susan's main points in hosting our working group conversation was that thinking about land as a commodity is a kind of misjudgment. It's something that just misses the mark. And she draws heavily on Rudolf Steiner's characterization of this situation. And she also described when we think of land as a commodity and we trade it like a commodity, what disturbances, what sufferings that is connected with. And those are the things that I want to try to share and characterize today from my conversation with her and her colleague David Fix, both of whom have extensive experience in the land trust movement, and particularly the community land trust movement. I want to first of all just share a very elegant characterization of what economics is that Susan actually started the conversation with. And this is a characterization that certainly grows directly from Rudolf Steiner's orientations and ideas about how to understand economics. Economics is nothing more than human ingenuity organizing labor to transform the natural world into products to share with others. I'm going to say that again. It's very dense. So when we ask ourselves, what is economics? We can entertain this as a way to look at what economics is. Economics is nothing more. It is only human ingenuity organizing labor to transform the natural world into products to share with others. I'm just going to give a couple examples for anyone who might find that helpful. When we say human ingenuity organizing labor, if we think about, for instance, different ways that we might work together to produce, let's say, clothing, depending on how we set up our production room and how we distribute tasks and where we place different things, it can have a huge impact on the productivity of our business. And that's related to what in this description from Susan is called human ingenuity, or ideas and intelligence. So human ingenuity, organizing labor, so organizing ways of working, but working on what? And this is the other part of economics. To transform the natural world into products. You know, it's not just about having ideas and intelligence to organize, let's say, how we produce clothing in a certain business that we might have, but it's also about taking natural fibers or creating synthetic fibers and then transforming them through human labor or even machines that are guided by human labor to create products. So there we have two parts of the economy. One is that it's about ingenuity and organizing how we work But two, what are we organizing? Our work is transforming natural resources into commodities like clothing or furniture or mining energy resources or building machines or computers. That's transforming natural resources into things that can be used. And here's the last part, to share with others. Now, you might think when you first hear that, that seems like a kind of inessential part of this characterization, because it seems almost moralistic. It seems like, what does that have to do with creating products or creating goods? Why do you have to share them with others? But actually, it's intrinsic to the modern economy, and it has been already for a very long time. And that's because the economy developed in the last centuries in such a way that there has been a division of labor and social specialization, so that when we really look at what we're doing for our jobs, if we're, for instance, working in a bakery, we are not baking goods for ourselves. We are not transforming that wheat into bread for our own consumption. We're doing it for other people, to share with other people. And this, when you really start thinking about it, you stop and you look at what we are doing, all of us in our vocations, every day, all day. This turns out to be a core element of the modern economy, that we're really creating things to share. And now, if you're homesteading or living in isolation, this of course does not apply to you. But we're again talking about the modern economy here. Now, this brings us to the core conversation that we wanted to have with Susan, which was, what is the significance of looking at land as a commodity, which is a common, conventional way that we organize our societies today. And in essence, Susan Witt suggests, following Rudolf Steiner, that looking at land as a commodity is a misjudgment, that it's actually a common inheritance that we all have when we're born into the world. And that the only value, economic value, that where there's an interface with land is when we transform land and turn it into products. So for instance, through agriculture, but also through actually mining resources from land. So it's not the land itself, but transformation of nature that leads to things that should be looked at as commodities. And okay, that might seem like a little bit of a technical objection or nuance to bring into a conversation, but I hope you'll bear with me. Because one of the opportunities that we have is to try to understand how looking at land like a commodity is one of the drivers of inequality and suffering for countless people around the world. And this is one of the things that we discussed with Susan. She had suggested that we look at certain lectures in Rudolf Steiner's economics course, which we did in preparation. And the lectures that she suggested were focused on the difference between what he calls real credit and personal credit. And what does that mean? Real credit, personal credit? Well, personal credit would be if we make a loan to someone who has a good idea, for instance, of establishing a new way of producing something that they think they can turn into a business. And so that's personal credit. That's giving somebody money because we think that they can turn it into an efficient or profitable, bountiful activity. And the other kind of credit would be to give someone credit based on land, for instance, real credit. And then we look at land as if it has value, and we give someone money or credit based on that value. And that value is not static. Land values change. So for instance, you could purchase a piece of land, and the value of that land could go up, and you could sell it, and you could receive more money than you put into it. And really, nothing has changed with the land in the time in between. And this happens every day all over the world. One of Rudolf Steiner's observations, which is a really intriguing thing to live with, is that when we give someone a personal loan, the real question is whether they're successful in creating this bountiful situation or productive situation that they pitch to the bank, let's say, or a group of lenders. If they do manage to succeed in creating values with this capital, then what happens is everybody benefits. Let's say, for instance, that someone wants to develop a new way of harvesting grains that leads to a higher yield and really usable grain during the threshing process. Just an example. Well, it's not that when they succeed in this, they somehow are just going into business as a normal farmer and then they're paying back a loan. No, they've actually created a technique which can be used by many other people and which allows for there to be many more goods in the economy, much more grain, much more usable grain. And because of this, they actually help bring prices down or make things more accessible for everyone from a perspective of, let's say, bread. So when you give loans and personal credit to people who have new ideas and also new initiatives, new ideas how to organize labor in a more efficient way, when those are successful, it really affects everybody in the whole economy in a positive way by really bringing prices down or making things more accessible. When we compare this to land, which is, I guess, the crucial point that Susan wanted us to think about. We give money to someone based on the fact that they, quote, unquote, own land. And they might even get a profit, like, let's say, the entrepreneur who created the new threshing machine. They might get a profit just because they sit on the land and they sell it a year later and they make more money. But they haven't added anything to the economy of a commodity character. They have not improved any process of production to share with other people. They have more access to the goods in the economy because they have more money than they put in, for instance. But in the meantime, it just means that everyone else in the economy has to work harder because they have to make up for this tendency to create values for a group of people that actually aren't contributing to the economy. So all the other workers, in essence, have to suffer a kind of inflation. So this is one of the thoughts that Susan wanted us to really understand, and pointed out how it's connected to some contemporary studies in economics, such as the work of Thomas Piketty on capital. And for those of you who are familiar with it, one of the outcomes of that study was that those who have capital or have money are easily able to increase it, and that at a certain level of inequality, the growth of inequality is almost guaranteed. And this brings us to a really interesting point, because one of the ways that capital increases is through, for instance, investments in real property or land. And then seeing the values go up without actually adding anything to the market of a commodity character. And because of that, as Rudolf Steiner observed over 100 years ago, everyone else in the economy has, in a certain sense, less access to the goods and services that we're sharing with one another. So this brings us to the interesting question, what would it look like if it was not possible to own land as a commodity because we recognize that land is not a commodity? And this is the question that Susan was discussing with us. So, here we've come to this point that, or question that we can live with, is it actually a kind of false judgment or an inappropriately placed judgment to look at land as a commodity? Shouldn't it be seen in a different way? And if so, how should it be seen? And this is where the land trust movement, or decommodification of land, steps in. And it has to do with removing land from the market and placing it in a trust to be stewarded by the individuals that live in a certain area for uses that are beneficial for society as a whole and the region, for instance. And it's not possible just to get land by buying it. And in fact, land itself has been removed from the market so that the only thing that is bought and sold, in the case of the work that Susan Witt has done, are improvements on infrastructure on the land. So for instance, a farmer might be able to sign a lease to use land for a long period of time because it's recognized that the farmer is going to be able to create food and feed, let's say, create healthy food for many, many people in an area. And the farmer then does not own the land, but has rights of use of the land. And yet the farmer puts up a barn, puts up, for instance, fences, puts up a well or puts down a well. And all of these things, which are improvements of a more commodity character, the farmer indeed has a right to sell, for instance, in this model of the land trust movement, for a fair price if they come to the situation where they need to move on. But they cannot sell the land because the land is taken off of the market through this particular organizational structure of the community land trust. Now, there are other ways that people go about doing this, but it's helpful to have a conversation with someone who has experience with a particular way of going at this and clearly understands what they're doing and why they're doing it. So, we had then some conversations that were related to the idea of a World Economic Conference. And in the last episode, I spoke about Walter Johannes Stein and Daniel Dunlop's movement from a World Power Conference towards a World Economic Conference, where they thought that the environmental sciences are becoming more and more aware of the interconnected whole of the earth as a foundation for economics and the global economy could be a good foundation for coming together in a cooperative, humanitarian, or moral spirit to work together in economic life. Beyond religious differences, beyond national differences, in a truly fraternal spirit of cooperation and mutual aid. And if you listen to that episode, you will remember that in these working groups that are preparing our gathering in September, we wanted to get together with an expert to discuss one cardinal question of associative economics. The second thing we wanted to do was to ask, what would this look like if there was a global economics conference dedicated to associative, cooperative orientations? And three, what would be needed to move from where we are and what we know today towards such a worldwide economic culture of collaboration? And so with Susan, we wanted to talk about this question as well. And one of the things that really stood out is that it would be important if we were going to really have a widespread movement where enough people understood the damages of commodifying land and how it drove inequality. And it made people that already work really hard, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs, work harder because there are others of us who are putting money in land, which is not a commodity, but still receiving profits or an added income, which we can use in the market, so without contributing to the market. Now, contributing as a laborer or as an inventor or a manager, I'm putting all of those together. We would have to have a global understanding that owning land was a sin against our moral conscience. So that's one thing that would have to happen. The second thing is we would have to have land trusts, organizations of different kinds that were able to assist in taking land off of the market and yet allowing it to be stewarded in a proper, transparent, and social way. So those were 2 of the things that would need to happen on a large scale if there was to be a world power, not a world power conference, but a world economic conference. And one of the things that we could imagine to help try to understand this viscerally is in the United States, not so long ago, human beings were traded as commodities, particularly those who were kidnapped in different parts of Africa and then sold truly like commodities on the marketplace. And that was as recently as 1865. And since then, in the United States, people have a visceral understanding of the evil of owning other people and looking at them as commodities. And we have to imagine that before that, there were countless people who had no problem with this. Now, of course, those of us in the United States, I'm not in the United States now, but I'm from the United States. Many in the United States do not realize that slavery is still legal in the United States in the prison system, that if you are charged with a crime, you can be forced to labor and to not receive anything for your labor by the state. And this is an ongoing reality in the United States prison systems. But even so, most people would be surprised, meaning they understand that looking at people as commodities is what we would even call ethically regressive and unconscionable. What would it mean for us to feel the same way about land ownership? This was one of the questions that we were talking about at the end. If when someone said that they owned land, that it would be something that instinctively, socially, everyone knew was connected with social suffering, with inequality, and with also a limited grasp of the true nature of the modern economy. Working towards that kind of a social movement and understanding where owning land was seen as a kind of social evil or something that should be avoided because of the unbelievable suffering and unfairness and inequality that was connected with it. So not only a moral judgment, but an economic judgment as well. What are the effects of this way of treating land in the overall global economy? So I hope that I've done justice to some of the core ideas that we discussed with Susan and David. And this is one of the episodes that I wanted to record and offer for those of you who are interested, but as well as an invitation to come to the Goetheanum September 19th to 21st and participate in the event where we're going to be taking the conversations these working groups are leading to another level. Questions of Courage is a project of the youth section, and it's a collaboration with the Goetheanum communications team. As you can see, the production costs are very low, but I still invite you to consider to make a contribution to the youth section. If you make a contribution, it will go to the Youth Access and Project Fund, which really lowers the economic barriers for young people to come to youth events and programs and gatherings on issues such as the ones that we've just been talking about. And your support is very appreciated and also very needed. Thank you.